You're here with Ryan Dawson. This is Addy Ads, Anakin Skywalker, YouTube's chosen one. Ryan Dawson is a filmmaker, documentarian, and historian who went to William and Mary College. He's been doing political activism for 20 years about now, although it doesn't really look like it, Ryan.
Thanks.
Thanks for chatting with me today. And Ryan just asked me what the topic was, and I was just telling him that I'm really grateful for the chance to talk with him. But I just wanted to start with your love of history. Do you remember what started that or why that started?
I have a twin brother who was very interested in history. And I think just conversations with him, I was more of a science person at first, but just the discussions we used to have. And then he would read all these books and kind of summarize them, and I was doing other stuff. And there wasn't like a one thing. I mean, I've always enjoyed certain parts of history, but then I started realizing it was more important than just being interesting. You can really learn from historical mistakes if you bother to learn what they were. But a lot of people, they don't really delve into it. And for example, the huge conflict in Palestine between the Israelis and Palestinians, there are a lot of almost ancient historical claims being made. And if you're ignorant of ancient history, then you can't really sort any of that out. And I think the history of economics is very interesting. The history of philosophy is very interesting. Most people, when they think of history, they just think of the history of wars, who killed who and took this territory or that. But history of science, there's a lot of different histories in the. I think it's the most important thing is everything that's ever happened. And so it's endless material. And if you're not interested in history, then you're just not interested in anything, because that's the largest subject we have.
That's true. It is the largest subject we have. And your twin brother put you onto it. Where's he now?
He's in the United States. I think we were both interested into it, but it was just, I was, when you have an identical twin, you tend to purposely not do the same things to differentiate yourself. And just why, I can trust his judgment on stuff. So I'm like, oh, you go delve into the Civil War, and I'm going to go look into World War I or whatever and compare notes.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That you guys got to do that. But what got me honestly into it more so, like more deeply than I had been into it before, I think, was World War II. And you actually blew my mind well, let me just back up before we get into World War II. You mind fucked me, man. Like, and this hasn't happened in a while where a YouTuber just like mind fucks me and like shifts my consciousness. Like, I had to lie down for a little bit, like after one of your videos. And believe it or not,
don't go look at my BitChute then, because it's way
way
Billy.
Yeah, way more black pill. I'm going to check it out though. I haven't yet, but it was actually your performance essay on fatalism and video gaming, and I watched it and I was like, wow, that is so sad. Like, and I had to like sit down for like
saw, though.
20 minutes and just think about it. Yeah, do you want to go into that a little bit
too? I studied philosophy at William and Mary. That's history of philosophy is very interesting, because you can see how I don't think you can really understand history without philosophy, or philosophy without history. You kind of need at least like a B+ in each to understand what's going on, because culture and social factors and religion and so on really influence philosophical ideas. But I was thinking more of something modern on this. We have a whole generation that has grown up in the digital age. Like I started in the paper age, right? And I've been alive through the beginning of
Ryan. Just, you don't have to tell us the exact number, but can you give us a ballpark of how, because you're really hard to guess your age because you look quite young.
40s.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I look 30s. I don't know.
I mean, you could pass for late 20s, man.
Do we say gumsuri in Japanese? Like brown nose? maybe nowadays, because a lot of people do doing drugs and whatnot, they age a little faster. But
Hajimimashite.
Genkiです. It's
Yoroshiku
good to meet you.
onegaishimasu.
You know a little bit of Japanese.
Skoshi desu. Hi. Genki?
Wonderful. EA. I'm actually a
Okay,
little bit
that's pretty
sick.
much all I know. But speaking of Japan, you live in mainland, right? Osaka?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes,
And
I do.
what, because you're obviously American, from the South, what made you move to Japan? Is it your hatred of the United States, Ryan?
No, I always joke George Bush got reelected, and I said, "F it, I'm out." But um, I just wanted to visit Japan for. I wanted, when I was in my 20s, before I got locked into a job, I thought I want to travel while I can, and Japan was on the list for a number of reasons. I mean, why not? But it has a lot of my interests overlap with Japanese things throughout different phases of my life. Uh, Even though it would change, whether it was martial arts or art or gaming or whatever, it was always Japanese. So I thought I would just come visit, and I really wasn't planning on moving, but I did because once you're here, it's hard to return. Um, it's really hard. The United States was at war, which I vehemently opposed, and in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then they reelected a warmonger. And even if they hadn't, the other choice was still a warmonger with John Kerry. It wouldn't have made a dime's worth of difference, and I don't want to pay for that. And once I had children, I really had to think about it too. I mean, in the U.S. schools, they're shooting people and they're doping them up on Adderall, and it's violent. Even if it's not like violent with guns and knives and so on, it's verbally violent. People are really abusive to each other. They don't even notice it, because it's just like fish don't know they're in the water. It's so pervasive that they don't see it unless you step out of it. And after being out of the United States and going back in, and I would just listen to conversations, even with friends, 6 people in rumors, and they're always putting each other down. Even if it's sarcasm, it's still like hostile the whole time. And then a lot of friends, they just are really catty and backstabby, especially the women. They would just dog each other. And I don't see that here. It's very different. And I never realized the level of stress and just hostility that people walk around with in the US. They're a little bit on edge all the time. People are paranoid of each other, right? There's bars on windows in certain schools in certain cities and things. The level of theft and violence is so high. You just like, oh, I can't go to that place at this time of night by myself. Why not? And that's just accepted as normal, but it's not normal. You should be able to go out anywhere, wherever, alone or not. You could here. You can't do that in a lot of American cities. Like, they just know, especially as a woman or something, alone in Detroit at this alleyway, you're just asking for something. That's not normal, right? That level of violence and fear, and that shouldn't exist, but it's pretty much unfixable at this point. But there are places in the world that, like Japan, maybe South Korea, there are spots where, yeah, it's perfectly fine to go wherever you want, whenever you want. And so for my kids, I'm looking at education. I'm looking at the cost of healthcare. I'm looking at all the disadvantages in the U.S. I don't want them to have to deal with that. So I stayed.
When you were talking about the differences in people and social interactions, Ryan, were you talking about young people specifically or Americans in general?
In general, but I think the youth it's getting worse because they have this trade up culture. What is it? Tinder? Is that
That's one of them.
one of the things?
I
Yeah,
don't use them, but
we didn't have that. Like, I knew my neighbors and we'd play basketball and ride bikes and stuff, but you couldn't just. It's so easy to meet complete strangers now with Facebook and Tinder and whatever, that when as soon as somebody does one little thing that's annoying, or just ghost that person, get another one, they're totally replaceable. And there's no real conflict resolution. They're not learning how to cope with stress and deal with disagreements, and they are making echo chambers, and we call it purity spirals. And I see these little clicks going into purity spirals, and I'm thinking, man, it really creates an approval seeking subculture where the lemmings will know what they're supposed to think and say, and they'll do it because they don't want to be socially ostracized.
Yeah.
And more they're being pushed into a sort of virtual social life. I see kids spending hours and hours on Fortnite or first person shooter games or whatever. And I don't have a problem with video games or anything, TV, phones, whatever your thing is you like to do, as long as you're only doing it for entertainment or something. But I think it's both that and a bit of escapism. And what I was saying in the video that you saw was, I don't think the youth really see a clear connection between effort and reward. Like, they could put enormous effort into a project in school or at a job or whatever, and it won't matter because it's all about who you know, nepotism, etc., to such a degree that why bother becomes the attitude. Whereas in a game, your output is based on your input. The more you play, the more you practice, the more items you get or whatever. Like in an RPG game, the more you advance, and there's a clear connection between work, hard work, or time you put in and results, which is something very enjoyable and satisfying because they don't see that in the real world.
It's the best feeling, I think. And I've actually struggled with this belief in my past as well, which is, I think, one of the reasons why your essay that you performed affected me so much. Is it seems that one of the if not the most demoralizing thing is not seeing any reward for your effort, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what I think. Like,
you're thinking years too, like, oh, go to college. Like, you're talking about investing a big chunk of your life, really, and it might not matter at all. And how motivated can you be into something that you're gonna really gamble here, spend a lot of money, spend a lot of your time, good time, of your youth pursuing something, and in the end, so what? Or worse, now you're in debt or something. And it used to be, like, for my parents' generation, like, if you went to college, it was good as gold. Like, you were getting a good job, and that just isn't the case now, and they know it. And it's not just because, oh, they majored in gender studies of hippos or whatever.
right.
People will say that. I see a lot of people just dogging on the youth, and I see people making fun of boomers and stuff too, and it's a little tit for tat. But I feel like the young people, they've really got a bad lot, and this is why they're so bitter and lash out against other generations, whatever, because they're never going to own a house, right? They're never, unless you know the right people and everything. There'll be 30, mid 30s, maybe 40 before they could pay off a mortgage, and they'd need to basically either work for someone they knew. It has nothing to do with their own effort, right? It's nothing to do with their merit. Just like a minimal level. Or you're not, can you read and all, things you could have left school in 7th grade and do what you end up doing anyway.
Yeah.
Right? You don't, what you specialize in really doesn't matter. You learn 90% of what you're going to do on the job in the first 2 weeks of the job. Like, every job you're going to have, except for some specialist things, even when you're a lawyer, etc., that's the one you get. I'm like, not really. You do an apprenticeship and you follow them around at the firm or at the doctor's hospital, whatever, and you learn it on the job. You really learn a lot of the skills by doing them. And so this whole idea of liberal arts education has really failed the population because they're not learning pragmatic skills, or it's very unbalanced. Like, there is a purpose for liberal arts. I get the argument and all, but it's very lopsided. And a guy that wrote about a lot was Ted Kaczynski. He ended up losing his mind. He was the Unabomber. But if you read his manifesto, you shouldn't dismiss the point somebody makes just because of the end. Like, at the end, he ended up mailing bombs and things.
Or another thing people do is they dismiss an entire person's beliefs based on one belief.
Right. Or they'll say, or they play the false dichotomy game. If you're good at A, you must suck at B, because it's this, and that's where you get a lot of silly stereotypes. Oh, blondes are dumb, athletes are dumb, smart people are socially backwards, whatever. There's always some negative thing attached to any positive quality. And it's crabs in a bucket. It's a way of bringing people down. Oh, you're really XYZ, but I bet ABC bad, right, about you. And that's what they try and nail people with. It's a cult of the inferiority personality, where so if someone's beautiful or athletic or intelligent or some positive quality, it's necessary for that for their own psychology to tack onto that something negative to help bring that person down so they feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
And
You
it
went to
usually just
college
doesn't
though,
apply.
Ryan. Just going back to the college thing, you went to William and Mary, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
What was, looking back on it, and I know it was a while ago for you now, what was that like for you now, and what did you do immediately after in how you used your degree, if at all?
Actually, I went to college because my girlfriend was at the college. That's the whole reason I did it.
That's not a good reason,
And
Ryan.
to prove that I could get into this school. It's a very prestigious school. And I was like, I'll do that. And I thought college would be beneficial from the social aspects as well. And for me, it was beneficial studying philosophy and history. Although most of my work outside of school has been in government and economics, like politically centered, I guess, about geopolitics and
Mm.
terrorism, war, etc. But I think the skills I learned in writing papers for history gave me general research skills. If I can cite a paper for something about World War II, I could do it about the Iraq War also, you know. So in a way, it gave me a skill set that was useful, even though it's not directly related. And philosophy as well, I've seen, and definitely in politics. I mean, political ideologies are just watered down philosophies for the masses. It's
Yeah.
but you can see it. It's the cult personality that people get. If I criticize Obama, then so you love Trump,
Yeah,
or
right.
vice versa, right? If not A, then B. I call it basic bitch syndrome. Um, my co-host calls it the light switch mentality. It's either this one or that one.
Oh, there you go.
And
Is that the pug? The pug guy?
yeah, I've got
Yeah.
several. I have Andrew is my sort of Syrian war specialist. Pug, we're usually doing health related or general stuff, and the election's coming, so he's been coming on more and more. And I have another guy, Chris, in Britain for specific things like Brexit and stuff. And then Michael Darr from the United States. Um, he's in the meme wars right now, deep in the trenches.
I saw your video. You guys do that every year on your channel?
Well, just the presidential elections is where it kind of started, the great meme war of 2016.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not that involved other than encouraging it. Um, I like doing films, and I'm supposed to be the serious guy, but I feel like you need both to maximize your effect. You need someone who can do the humor, someone that can meme. You got to get your foot in the door, but all that has to ultimately lead to, okay, here's the real grits of it. Here's a documentary or something. And that's
Right.
my role.
Some
But
substance. And
yeah,
speaking
I
of
like the
foot
memes
in the
though.
door, I was watching another video actually right before you joined me, and you're wearing a MAGA hat, and behind you in many of your videos is the Confederate flag. And you said something in Sean's podcast.
I had a MAGA hat.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was your video on Spencer.
Huh. I don't remember.
Okay.
Maybe.
You're also
I
wearing
often have the Confederate flag. That's right there actually. But yeah, I must have had a reason for the MAGA hat. I didn't even know I owned one.
Yeah, I'm not trying to paint you a certain way or anything, because I know you're not.
I might have done that right after the election or something, just to rub their noses in it. Like,
Yeah,
ha.
you're wearing a John Bolton shirt. It was
Oh, I got that right now.
oh, the orange one?
Yeah, Bolton must go.
That's
Yep.
crazy. You're wearing the same shirt.
Oh, I made this shirt.
Oh, you did. Awesome.
Yeah, I designed all those things, and he did go. I
Yeah.
made a Bolton must go and started that campaign, and he was fired. So
So
not
let's
bad.
talk about, and I think this will segue into World War II, just the Confederate flag. You said the story you told at the end of Sean's interview, man, that story was crazy, bro. Like
Oh, going
about
to
your,
Google.
yeah, that one
Yeah.
too. And we should get into that. But you're talking about your ancestor that was in the Civil War, and you
Oh,
said
I
something
got
to
a
the
lot of
effect
stories
of
like that.
the
Yeah.
South are the good guys. And when you said
Mhm.
that, I was like, well, I don't take everything you say 100%, Ryan, because you have very similar humor to what I find funny. And I know you weren't serious, but can you explain why you said that in terms of the Confederacy?
Well, there's no like good guys, bad guys, but in any war, it's the poor fighting the poor. That's what happens. And the Civil War was a banker war, just like every other war. The spin on it is, oh, this is like 100 years after they start saying, oh yeah, the Civil War was fought to end slavery,
Yeah.
which is about as accurate as saying we went into Afghanistan for women's liberation, or we invaded Iraq because we felt sympathy for the Kurds. And you could point to very um, real life statistics on how, yeah, women don't have rights in Afghanistan, and the Kurds were an oppressed minority in Iraq, but it has nothing to do with why we went to war. Went to war in Afghanistan to control opium because it's used as an off the books budgetary item that can finance illegal activities like sponsoring Al Qaeda and terrorist groups in Syria. And we went to war in Iraq because a bunch of neocons of Israeli partisans lied and dragged us into war because Saddam Hussein was supporting Palestinians. There's nothing to do with it. And the Civil War was because the North invaded the South. The South didn't attack the North. The South seceded from the North. It's the North that attacked. And I can summarize the causes real fast. I can send you a video on it with all the details and stuff. But
Please
essentially,
do.
the the main reason for Southerners to fight the Civil War was they were being attacked. The main reasons for secession is different than the reason for a war, because they were not planning to go to war with the United States. Lincoln was. He procured the entire U.S. Navy prior. He was planning on doing this. He put a naval blockade on 3 of his own states, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. North Carolina and Virginia had not seceded yet. And had they not seceded, there is no Civil War, because that was half the Southern population was Virginia and Carolinas. The first shots are at Fort Sumter, where they were collecting the new import-export taxes. And that's what they were fighting for. You had 25% of the population paying 87% of the taxes, and almost the entire revenue was being dumped into New York and Boston and Philly, and it wasn't being spent on the South at all. And the tariffs that they put on imports from Europe were bad in and of themselves, and it resulted in mirrored tariffs by Europeans on American goods on cotton and tobacco, but that only affects one area. New York doesn't care if there's a huge tax on cotton because they're not making cotton. They're buying cotton from the South, who would be forced to sell to them because they can't sell to the Europeans. On top of that, they got taxed to export their goods as well, which benefited the North because they're not exporting textiles to Europe. Europe's way more advanced on textiles. They've been established a lot longer. It was economic reasons. The other one was they were competing from railroads between Chicago to San Francisco and New Orleans to San Francisco. It didn't matter about slaves. 5 northern states had slaves and fought on the Union side. When the 13th Amendment came to be ratified, 3 northern states refused. You didn't just lose more than 500,000 people and then not sign to ratify the amendment that would liberate slaves. Also, there's the Corbin Amendment prior to the Civil War ever starting, not a single shot fired, where they enshrined slavery in the Constitution, and it was the North had already signed it. All the South had to do was sign it, but to sign it, they'd have to stay in the Union, and every single one of them refused. So it can't be about slavery. When Lincoln personally wrote every governor and said, if you stay, if your state needs to stay in, if you sign this document, we're not going to mess with the institution of slavery. That's how badly Lincoln wanted. Lincoln wasn't pro-slavery. He wanted whites and blacks to be completely separate. It was worse. He was a send them back to Africa guy, or send them the South America guy.
Can
And
I just ask, because this is a lot to process, Ryan. Where did you get that info about Lincoln?
oh, I've got lots of books on Lincoln. The Corwin Amendment, you can look it up. I mean,
Okay.
Lincoln personally wrote Corwin Amendment,
Hmm.
and it said that they weren't going to mess with labor, which included slavery, if they would stay in the Union, and they all refused. Um, Virginia was split in half. I mean, that's why we have West Virginia. But the western part of Virginia was not affected by the tariff so much because they're not on the coast and they're not on the Mississippi River. So it didn't matter for that part of the state. And so they were Americans and they stayed in the Union, although they did have slaves. Kentucky had slaves. Delaware had slaves. The Washington D.C., the capital of the North, had slaves. Grant had slaves. The general, the Union general, he had slaves. Robert E. Lee freed his slaves. So it wasn't like that. And East Tennessee and Western North Carolina tried to remain pretty neutral. Parts of Maryland were Southern, parts were Northern. It wasn't even really clear. And they'll talk about the Mason-Dixon line, but that doesn't divide the North and South from the Civil War.
Yeah.
But and a
Well,
lot of
thanks for that,
Southerners that are
Ryan.
fighting that war are not.
Yeah, go
They
ahead.
didn't have any slaves. They're poor as hell.
Mhm.
Like, they don't benefit from it either. I mean, think about how much they complain now of just having cheap labor from Mexico, whatever. Try having free labor. Can't compete with that. It was bad, but Lincoln would say things like he didn't want blacks and whites to mix blood. He didn't want any of the new territories to be slaveholding, not because of how abhorrent slavery is, but because he didn't want blacks and whites to live together, period. And
Mm,
none of them were. Um, Slavery was on its way out anyway, globally, and you didn't have to have a massive fight to get rid of it anywhere else. But they made it an issue in the middle of the war uh, to help keep European powers from siding with the South and joining the war. They tried to make some moral veneer and make it about slavery, which kind of backfired because a lot of people in the Union Army were like, "I'm not fighting for that," and
yeah. That is
yeah,
a
it's
lot
just,
to process, and I'm definitely going to do my diligence on reading about that, because something like that just it like shifts your whole perspective on such a huge event, um, that it takes time, I think, to process that sort of new information.
it is. But the largest race riots in history were in New York City during the Civil War, where
Hmm.
they went around hanging black people. Custer went west and murdered Native Americans right after the war,
Yeah.
and they enslaved the Chinese. So it's not like the North was some anti-racist
Yeah,
utopia or
right.
something. They hated black people. They hated American Indians. They didn't even consider them people. The final solution is not from Hitler. It's from William Tecumseh Sherman. The same
Yeah.
man that burned Atlanta wanted to kill every Indian. He's also the guy that only good Indian's a dead Indian. He did Wounded Knee. General Custer went out all the way to Little Bighorn. He was defeated by a crazy horse, but he tried to murder them all. And they'll say, "Oh, the Chinese weren't slaves." Yeah, they were, and they're paid in script.
They
And
made the railways.
the half from the west to the east, and they
Yeah.
use blacks and Irish to build from the east to the west. Yeah.
Wow. So World War II. As I said before, it's one of the big things that got me interested in learning about history, especially in the past few years. Why isn't World War II the good war?
Yeah, that's often the thing is they'll say, well, surely that's the exception, right? Is World War II. And I say, well, you're starting the story in the middle. Because, like, yeah, you have to have a war. Like when the North invaded the South, I understand defending your home so they don't burn it down and kill you. You got to fight at that point.
Right.
And, once World War II gets going, you can't, it's already gone, but there wouldn't have been a World War II if there hadn't been a World War One. If there hadn't been a Treaty of Versailles that took land away from the Germans, and German speaking people living in Poland and we're living in France, and they're not French, they're not Polish, they're German, and you just took the land away and awarded it to someone else that is not part of their sovereignty. It's not the right culture. It's not the right linguistic group or anything. And they didn't start World War One. The Allies did, right? The Serbians killed Franz Ferdinand in Austria.
Mm.
Russia had an interest, and the French central bank had loaned a lot of money to the Russians for their rapid industrialization, and they needed them to pay back those loans, which they weren't going to do if they lost the war. And World War One begins, but who started that? And since when are all these colonial powers some bastion of morality? They took 40% of the planet, right? 44 million Africans in the slave trade. The Belgian killed 15 million in just the Congo. King Leopold. He should be right up there when people are saying Hitler, Stalin, King Leopold. 15 million, right? You had Holodomor in between the two wars. About 8 to 11 million Ukrainians killed by Soviets. But what the French and British had done all over the world, I mean, India was part of Britain. All the Western Africa was French. And this was all by force, right?
Yeah.
Japan had annexed Korea. And so suddenly, it's mysterious to me how these groups can wave their finger at anybody, at the Germans, for reclaiming German land that had been taken. They're not, like, at first, anyway, it gets, obviously, you know what happens, but at first they were trying to reunite to Danzig. And how can these colonial powers that have replaced their languages, of, like the Americas, Canada, they all speak English now. Didn't start that way,
Right.
right? Almost all of South America is either Portuguese or Spanish. There's some Amerindian languages around, but they colonized everything. And they're saying, how dare you go into Poland? My perspective is, yes, it was wrong. Absolutely what the Third Reich did, but it was just as wrong when all the powers fighting them did the same things. They were still trying to gain independence years after World War II, in Algeria, Vietnam. The French got out, the Americans got in. They still trying to maintain that colonial empire. So
Poland too.
yeah, everyone. It's and it's not. It wasn't like good versus evil, right? It's governments, all of whom had murdered tens of millions of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Allies defeat the Axis. But I don't think the communist Chinese or the Soviet Union or the imperial powers of Britain, France, and the United States were good guys, right? Nor were, the Imperial Japan or Fascist Italy or the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler. They're not good guys either. But what you see from that war is you can point to the communists and say, oh, this many tens of millions of people end up starving, yada, yada. You can point to the fascists and show all the people they murdered. You can also point to the democratic republics and all of their genocidal history too. It's not the type of government that made a difference. It's government. And what unifies all three of them, fascist, communist, imperialist, is authoritarianism. That's what leads this collectivism, us versus them. But prior to World War II, most wars were to gain access to some kind of resource, whether it was gold or opium or trade routes or something. There was silver mines, what have you. From ancient times on, they're going after property or some sort of super resource, oil, gold, whatever. But from World War II on, the waging war itself became a resource, because when they started to mechanize militaries, the cost of building all the airplanes and tanks and all the machinery that goes into a modern war is billions and billions of dollars. And these industries have become the new East India Tea Company, right? That's a company that had as much or more money than the crown. These super corporations, the Lockheed Martins of the world, where it doesn't matter what they have. Picking a fight generates profits for what people call the military industrial complex. And so, and they always evoke Hitler as an excuse to do whatever they want. Oh, Saddam's the new Hitler. Gaddafi's the new Hitler. Ahmadinejad's the new Hitler. Assad's Hitler. Putin's Hitler. Whoever they don't like, they just say Hitler, and everyone stops thinking and gets emotional and go, well, you gotta hate Hitler, right? And he's new Hitler, or this so and so is a Nazi, so it's okay to do violence.
It's
I
so
just want, it's the
interesting
only
because you
thing you
hear
can say
about
is
it.
evil
Oh no, go
anymore.
ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, the only thing you can say is evil anymore is Nazism. Like that's what, like, if you're on a college campus, whatever, it's like 3, 2, 1 Nazi comparison, right? What about the Nazis? It's always a thing, as if there's any lack of other examples of evil, right? But that's always the thing because we didn't do it
Yeah,
for
it's
once. It was
very
the job.
interesting because you hear growing up, you hear that name Hitler a lot, but you almost never hear Stalin. You never hear Zedong. You don't hear these other
Pol
dictators.
Pot, yeah.
Why is that?
I think one main reason is because it was on film. So we saw the liberated camps and things. It's very shocking. And a lot of that film actually was uh, a little bit Hollywoodified, which I don't like because I think the atrocity is bad enough without exaggerations. And I think you also risk every time you make an exaggeration, you're risking people doubting the whole thing. I see that with like global warming alarmist. The world is not going to disappear in 12 years, 10 years now. Don't say stuff like that, right? Don't do it. Um, I see that too with September 11th or something, which I'm at 100% behind researching 9/11 and how independent Al Qaeda actually is from intelligence agencies, and all the grown up version is fine. But when people start saying, oh, yeah, holograms or some ridiculous exaggeration like that, then you've discredited the whole thing. The same thing with the Kennedy assassinations, 100% conspiracy to murder both Kennedys. But you get some real Fruit Loopy stuff, and it doesn't help, right? This kind of exaggerations don't help with anything. So
Yeah,
I think the reason though is you didn't hear about Stalin so much. One, because they won, and the winners write history.
yeah.
um, and the other one is, well, if he was so bad, but we were on his team, so that makes us look bad because we were allied with the Soviets in attacking fascism. So fascism has to be worse. It has to be because that's the ones we were against, and we were on the same side as the Soviet Union. Well,
Just
there
goes
doesn't
back
have
to
to be
that black and
anybody
white
good, right?
thinking again.
It
Yeah.
is, it is, and we got to be the good guys.
Mm.
So they'll say, well, we liberated the Jews and we did this and blah blah blah. I mean, you could spin that around and say, well, Hitler, whether he meant to or not, destroyed the British Empire, liberated over 87 countries that used to be under the yoke of imperialism, and gave them independence. Like, that's how they see it.
Yeah,
They
that's
love him.
definitely an argument to be made there for that
He didn't.
perspective.
That's not what he was trying to do, but that's what the result was. The British Empire was destroyed, and a lot of nations got their independence and got their sovereignty back.
Your forum that you were running back in '07, what it was it a political forum where you just people just discuss things?
So it started in 2005. It started. I was actually on this forum for this is so weird. Nocturne, which was just a band I liked, and I posted something there on mistake, like too many tabs open, something about philosophy called "You're Not What You Own," and they really liked it, so they put a like philosophy section, and it had an audience and stuff already. So I just started posting stuff on there, and then someone's like, "You need your own forum," and I was not tech savvy at all. So I started. We had Rise 2 Cents back in 2005 or so, and so I started writing on there, and I think after I think because of the Iraq War and September 11th, people wanted to hear my thoughts on that, and that became the most popular thing. So in 2005, I wrote this thing called Iraq 9/11 PNAC, All Roads Lead to Israel, which has over 500,000 reads, which is a lot for no videos or anything. And you have to realize Facebook and all that didn't exist. YouTube
I
didn't
vaguely
exist.
remember it, Ryan. For us, that was like what I was using was like MSN Messenger. Like that was
Mm-hmm.
my age. But yeah, it was that was like the early days where you really had to. The only people on the internet were, like you said, those more tech savvy people.
Yeah, there was like Newgrounds and stuff. That was your old school shit posting. E-Bombs World and
Oh, I remember
Q
E-Bombs
Envy.
World. It's still running, isn't it? E-Bombs World.
I mean, he's a renowned plagiarist. He just took a bunch of videos and wrote E-Bombs World on it. So at least it's a professional watermarker. But yeah, they might still be going. Newgrounds is still going. I used to know Tom Fulp, one of the founders of that. They bought it. There's something called Trauma Films. They did they do parody movies. So they did Tromeo and Juliet. Swamp Thing is one of theirs. Tromeo and Juliet is narrated by Lenny from Motorhead, which just makes it that much more awesome. It's all modern day, like they're getting tattoo nipple piercings and tattoos and stuff.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's real trashy, in a cool, in a fun Trailer Park Boys sort of way. And anyway, they bought their servers from them and started Newgrounds. And Newgrounds was like Flash animation when it first got started, and it was pretty basic at first. And now it's uncontrollable. But back then, when you had a forum, it was like GeoCities and Angel Fire and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
GeoCities. I remember making stuff like sites on GeoCities. Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. Like you'd have text, and then if you had like a bar, like a blood drippy bar, or just bars you could download, like GIF images, because animated GIFs were new, or GIFs or whatever. Yeah, so yeah, it was pretty low tech, and that's what. So to get 500,000 reads on that was,
That's quite an achievement
a
back
lot
then.
of people go, "Whoa, I hadn't heard this." And then it all got derailed by Alex Jones. He started with the loose change and all this other crap, and I couldn't make a documentary until YouTube came about in 2006. But back then they had time limits, so you couldn't go more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And what am I on part 27? Like it was ridiculous.
You know what's crazy, Ryan, is I think I remember watching one of your videos when I was younger, because I have always been a huge fan of YouTube. And up until like the past couple years, like I think it was like 90 or 80% of the users were male. So it was like usually just like tech savvy, like young people or
Yeah.
that demographic that would be on YouTube. And I
It's
can't
because
remember.
most of the internet is male because of porn. Like the two things that drove the internet to become the internet were pornography and video games, which are very male dominated. And the guys that put in the effort to learn like about videos and pictures and all that, it was partly motivated by getting their yank on or whatever. So that's how YouTube started.
It comes back to porn always, doesn't it?
It's a $1 billion industry, and kind of serendipitously it led to the net growing as fast as it did. Like the reason people got faster connections and so on was so they could get porn quicker. They could get videos instead of pictures. And as enough people had enough internet that was getting off dial up and all that and getting quicker and processing things better and so on, that then allowed for alternative history sites, political sites, and all the stuff we have now. But in the beginning, it wasn't much other than porn and news. It was like that was the internet. It's just that's what before the internet, that you couldn't pornography. You have to go to some convenience store and get a magazine or something. About all you could do, and you had to be 18. And so once it was available, they went nuts. And the early days used to be like sample picture and stuff like that. But our house is more of the gaming thing. My little brother was doing that stuff, and games really pushed for faster processing, and video cards and all that was good.
Gamers especially.
It was because of Warcraft and StarCraft, man. That's where they finally could play each other. And so the PC games start coming, and then phones and all. You see it evolve. And there's a talk in Tropic Thunder. Some nerd has gone off about the history of the internet, and my little brother's like, "That's is very accurate what he just said." Like it's getting ignored in the film. And the guy's like, "Are you still talking?" or something. But the whole thing he went through apparently was pretty accurate. But before there was MySpace before Facebook. It was very similar, but before that, it was forums. And so it was this weird thing where you get in a forum. Maybe you had an avatar. You
Yeah.
know, they didn't even start with avatars at first. You just had nicknames and stuff. And I remember the guys in my forum. We had like Socrates and Tim, and we had a crypto Chris Bolin. Um,
That's
and
crazy.
they
You
would.
remember those guys' names, their
I
usernames.
do because for 2 or 3 years, you know, we're writing everything. I wrote out all the BS about the Iraq War, and eventually it got me on my first radio show was on. Uh, it was out of Irving, California. I think it was like QAX 92 or something with Robert Larson, and I explained the anthrax, what happened with the anthrax after 9/11, and once people heard it, I mean, what I'm saying makes sense and can be verified, but you kind of don't even know that you don't know. Like, you don't know what to look for
Yeah.
until, and that's why I'm expanding into memes and all that. I gotta get my foot in the door. So I've already done the hard stuff, like the research part, but you know,
Yeah, I think you're
why
about
would
to
someone
blow up,
listen to
Ryan.
me, right? It's like, who, like, I would, oh, why do I gotta listen to you about the Iraq War? I'm like, you don't, but um you eventually will.
Yeah, it was the your I think it's your most popular video actually, Ryan, the Syria one. And I think I
Oh
remember
yeah, on the new
clicking on it,
channel. Yeah,
and
that's
I must have been like a freshman or middle school, I can't remember. And I was just like, why is this popular? And I wasn't about politics at all. I wasn't even interested in politics at the beginning of college, let alone, back then. So I was like, oh,
mhm.
this guy's talking about Israel. I don't really care.
I think it was
Um,
Syria that
or
map
Syria,
was.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. And I could be getting the dates wrong on that. But yeah,
But yeah, it was
after
almost
that
eight
though,
years ago because it's or 9 years ago. 2011 is the Syrian war, and I made it right. Because I felt like a lot of people know we're at war in Syria, but don't know why. A lot of people know Saudi Arabia is fighting with Yemen, but they don't know why. And so, because there wasn't even an official excuse. And you can't really do the oil thing because Syria is not an oil exporter. And that's what the usual typical leftist does, is just anything happens anywhere, it's because of oil. Like, yeah, you spent all of 5 seconds thinking about that, right? It's not oil. I mean, oil's got negative prices right now. If you look at a chart of our oil imports from Iraq before and after the war, it doesn't change. And if you try and make the argument, oh, it wasn't for us to get oils, but to prevent other people from getting oil, like China, um, Iraq was not even in the top 15 exporters of oil to China before the war. Now they're like number 2 after the war, and they're number 1 to India. So if that was what you're aiming at, you got the opposite result. That's not why we went to war. And that's not why we were in Syria. Syria was complicated. So I did a little video with maps and so on. And actually, the first video I did, I just sat there and talked. I just sat like I am now and explained the whole thing. And someone liked it so much that they animated some maps. And then I animated maps on top of their maps because they actually made a couple mistakes. But so you can you can see the quality when it switches to MS Paint. That was me. But I had to draw the pipelines where they were in the right places and stuff. And understanding pipeline politics is vital. And so oil is a reason, not the reason. But the larger reasons have to do with geopolitical interests. Mainly, Zionists want to expand into Lebanon, and Hezbollah resistance has always prevented them from doing that. And there's a corridor stretching from Iran through Syria to Lebanon that they call the axis of resistance, and they thought they could break that by invading Syria. So they tried, and they're losing. But Syria has suffered so much, almost a decade now of warfare, fighting Al Qaeda, Al Nasser Front, Al Sham, all these Wahhabi faction terrorists that are secretly, not very secretly, backed by the United States. So I thought, if I make a video and I don't get too much into details and I show the maps and the pipelines, I'll get them interested in it. And then hopefully they'll watch another video about a little bit more info, rather than me just dumping it all on them, So, and that worked. I think right now it's got like 5 or 600,000 views. But I used to get that all the time when YouTube first started. I was one of the first people on it, and like you said, nobody was doing anything. And if they were, it was like, look at my cat, or
Yeah,
I
that's
was the
why I
only.
remember you, because I remember like you said, there was almost nobody on YouTube. So you would like even like Dax Flame. It was just like this middle schooler talking to a camera, and he just blew up because he's so
Yeah,
hilarious.
I was erased in 2008, but I really started to take off because they lifted the time barrier. You can make videos more. It went from 10 minutes to 15 minutes to whatever, right? As long as you had enough views and so on, which I did. I'm like, okay, now I can put up War by Deception. It's this documentary I made about September 11th and the Iraq War. And I don't have to cut it up into a whole bunch of parts. So I did. And like, I remember I sent it to Scott